What's up, UCF Nation? Welcome to another edition of the UCF Football Updates podcast. As you could tell, I am very excited because the UCF football season is a mere 2 weeks away from starting. And you know what that means? That means the inaugural Big 12 year is here. And there's a lot of excitement, a lot of hype going into this season for obvious reasons. We are, just like I said, just about 14 days away. So I want to break down the ultimate UCF football preview. Obviously, UCF coming off a relatively disappointing year, 9-5 last year, that ended with losing 3 out of their final 4 games, obviously to Duke in the Military Bowl. Kind of came to a thudding halt there at the end after, an 8-2 start, getting to the conference title game, but unfortunately they were not able to beat Navy, not able to host Tulane in the conference championship game, then lose to Tulane, and then ultimately lose to Duke. But there was problems with that year. There were some positives, there were some negatives, but we're looking forward. We're looking forward to next season, which is this upcoming season, which is 2 weeks away. Crazy how fast that went. And the excitement couldn't be higher. Obviously, the main thing being that we're in now the Power 5. We have a stacked schedule, some really exciting teams coming to Orlando. We're going to Kansas State, the defending Big 12 champions. We're going to play Oklahoma and Dillon Gabriel. We're hosting Baylor. We're hosting some exciting teams. So we got a really exciting schedule. And I couldn't be more pumped for this year. So let's get into it. Let's start with the offense. Obviously, the offense, there's a lot of excitement being generated from there. We brought in a lot of playmakers through the portal, through the freshman class, and of course a lot of returning studs. It starts obviously with John Rhys Plumlee. I don't want to go too much into him. We've talked about him ad nauseum. He has his warts. He showed some real, amazing skills with his rushing game. Obviously led the team with over 800 rushing yards, 11 rushing touchdowns. Obviously was amazing on the ground, but his warts obviously showed in the passing game. There was, not the best touchdown to interception ratio, didn't throw that for that many yards, and it limited our passing attack overall. That was obvious. The big thing here is, does he develop? He's the clear-cut starter, into his second year at UCF, and he is going to be under a new OC with UCF bringing in former Knights quarterback Darren Hinshaw to be the offensive coordinator, who apparently will call the plays, will run the playbook, and has worked with John Rhys specifically on his footwork, on his passing game. And according to him, it may just be coach speak, but there's a lot of development there. And he looks to be a better player overall. We'll have more of a two-pronged attack. We won't be relying just on his legs, but he'll be able to pass, get our talented receivers the ball in space, and obviously hit them in the long ball and make our offense more than just one-dimensional. So it starts with John Rhys in the quarterbacks. Behind him, it's looking like Timmy McClain Jr., the USF transfer, is going to be the backup quarterback at the number 2 slot, and then Xavier Williams will be that QB3. And then UCF obviously has Dylan Rysick, the incoming freshman, for depth. A lot better situation than last year. Last year you had Mikey Keene, who only wanted to play for 4 games and not burn his red shirt. Timmy McClain obviously could not play yet. And then Tommy Castellanos, they were trying to kind of preserve his red shirt, but then they didn't really, and he was obviously a true freshman. But this year, if, God forbid any injuries do happen to JRP, there are options. There are at least 2 other guys that can step in and, emergency scenario, I'm sure that Rysick could play. But all the QBs are getting a lot of praise from the coaching staff. But obviously we're looking at JRP to be that guy and to take the next step in his evolution and his development. He has a lot of weapons, though. Let's go into the running backs. The running backs, we had one of the top rushing attacks in the country last year. We actually ranked number 9 in the country for rushing yards, and that was our bread and butter, was the rushing. That was obviously led by Isaiah Bowser, who has departed and graduated off to the NFL. And we have RJ Harvey returning, who was a breakout star for UCF last year. He's going to lead the attack, but there's some really exciting names behind him. Obviously, you have Johnny Richardson, you know, the speedster, the guy that can catch in the slot. He can run. If he gets in space, he's lethal. We all know his story. You obviously have DeMarcus Bowman, the Clemson, Florida transfer. There's a lot of hype around him. He's been making some really great plays in fall ball. There's some plays of him, you know, turning on the burners and burning guys on our defense. He looks really, really good, and he's going to be an exciting player for UCF. If it's not this year, it's going to be in the near future. And then you have some great pieces with Mark Anthony Richards and Jordan McDonald, who are both returning. So there's a ton of depth. I mean, running back, like I've said in my post, I think they're the clear-cut best unit on offense. Our ground game is going to be strong again. I still think that we will lean towards the ground compared to the air because it's our strength and we have so much talent there, with RJ Harvey leading the way. He really broke out last year with nearly 800 yards, was the leading rusher for yards per carry, not including when we're just talking about just running backs. So he was that guy on the running back unit. Then receivers, we know who returns there. Javon Baker and Kobe Hudson. That's arguably one of the best duos in the Big 12, if not in the country. Baker was a breakout candidate, was a breakout star for UCF last year, led the team in receiving with just under 800 yards, had 5 touchdowns. Kobe Hudson led the team in touchdowns with 7. They are both back, and the question is, will they be utilized more? I don't think the issue was talent. I think it was the personnel and JRP not able to effectively get the ball and move the ball in the air as consistently as we want. But we saw their athleticism. We saw the acrobatic plays they made. We saw when they got used how well they performed. And with JRP's supposed improvement, I think they are going to be a home run duo for UCF. I've talked about the depth at wide receiver. I think it could be a little bit better. But you have Xavier Townsend, who to me is a huge breakout candidate. All the coaches have been talking him up. Hinshaw, Malzahn have been talking about his noticeable improvements in the offseason. He's gotten bigger. He's gotten stronger. He's gotten faster. He will likely line up out of the slot. Right now, I think it's him and Corey Gamage, the Marshall transfer, who are going to be competing for that 3rd spot. But those are going to be the key guys after Hudson and Baker that are going to, you know, provide a balance for UCF out of our wide receiver unit. And don't be surprised if Gamage, you know, takes a step up and maybe even becomes wide receiver 2. He was one of the better receivers in the country last year. He led Marshall. He's on the Biltnikoff award watch list. He's a great player. He's got speed. He was Marshall's leading receiver last year. I think he just needs to learn the playbook, but I think he will be a huge piece of this puzzle at wide receiver. Behind those 4 guys, you know, we have some guys like Amari Johnson, Jalen Griffin, Deontay Marks that have been here for a while, haven't made a huge impact, but they are great depth pieces. I just don't know that we have a guy waiting in the wings like we've had in the past, like a Marlon Williams, who ended up being one of the best UCF receivers of all time and didn't really even get playing time, you know, consistently until his junior year. I don't know if we have a guy like that, but I do like our 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces. I think they're all talented. They can be used in spot duty, but if we have those top 4, that's a really good quartet of receivers. So I'm excited about them. It's just, can JRP get them the ball? Then the other key piece, and this is kind of a theme from last year, we talked about the QB and the offensive line needing to step up. And that's the same thing this year where the biggest question marks are. On offensive line, we had a lot of pieces go. Matt Lee transferred to Miami. Samuel Jackson graduated. All AAC first-teamer Ryan Swoboda graduated. So we're replacing 3 key starters on the line. Obviously, it's going to start up front with Loaki Paole. He's been all AAC first team or second team the past, 2 years in a row. He's going to be at guard, and he will kind of anchor that unit. The question is, the big battle right now is at center to replace Matt Lee. You kind of have 3 options with Bula Schmidt. You have Caden Kittler, who is a UCF recruit from 2 years ago, and Bula Schmidt. And then you have the Stanford transfer, Drake Metcalf, who are all vying for that center position. My early money is on Metcalf to take the center position, but we'll see. They're all battling out in camp right now before the depth chart is released. And then you obviously are going to have the other guard and tackle positions, which Could be a combination of Ed Collins, who got injured last year, but he's shown he's been pretty good when he plays. He's started multiple games in his UCF career. You have a guy like Paul Rubelt, who's the guy from Germany who can play in spot duty. Adrian Medley, who was actually supposed to be a starter last year before tearing his ACL prior to the season. So I think he will play a key role. Then you have Alabama transfer Amari Kite. And then Marcellus Marshall came over from Kent State. He was all-conference first team. I highly expect him to be one of the starting spots. So those other four are still being figured out, but I do think Marshall and Paulale are a lock at starters, and it's really the other three that we need to figure out. Not a ton of depth on offensive line, but the four transfers we got in are all good. They're all can play and start, and the depth behind them is okay. And we'll see if someone like Collins or Medley can emerge. They've been there. They've had some good moments, but let's see if they can do it consistently. Then to finish out the offense, you have tight end. At tight end, we all know it's Alec Holler. He kind of emerged last year as a guy. He was the 5th leading receiver on the team as far as receptions. Had a couple of touchdowns. Played well. He was a good blocker, big body. I think he's going to be a good red zone target for JRP. They've established a connection. They're roommates. They're really good friends. I think that could be a good duo, and I think that he can ultimately Holler can build on what he did last year and be a little bit better. The depth behind him is once again, I think the tight end has been a position of issue for UCF really since Klubiale graduated in 2018. So right now it's looking like Randy Pittman. He is a nearly 4-star tight end recruit from the 2023 class that looking like he's already emerging, making some plays. He's a real big guy, 6'4", well over 200 pounds. I think he can be a playmaker. He's just obviously a freshman, so he will be kind of that backup role. And then you have guys like Zach Marsh-Wojan, who is primarily been a blocker, and a couple other guys, Grant Stevens, that was part of 2 classes ago, that possibly can get some playing time there. We'll see, but it's obviously going to be Holler and Pittman, I think, are going to be the top 2. So the offense, as we know, it's going to revolve around, can the offensive line gel quickly with all these new pieces? And does JRP take the next step in his development? And do we have a more, two-dimensional or, more than just a one-dimensional offense? And can we get the passing game? The passing game was like 56th, 57th in the country last year. So that's something that UCF clearly needs to improve on if they're going to take this offense to the next level. I think all the pieces and the talent is there. It's can they gel? Can the transfers, kind of gel right away? And can UCF, air it out? And that's apparently what, Coach Hinshaw's offense is predicated on, is having a big air attack. Yes, the ground, I think, will still probably be a little bit over 50% rushing compared to passing plays, but I think his offense is more about stretching the field and airing the ball out, which is something UCF has missed now pretty much since Dylan Gabriel got injured in, week 3 or week 2 of the 2021 season. We haven't really had that vertical threat, but this year I think it's going to, at the very least, improve on the last, year plus. It maybe not be to levels of, 2017 or 2018 or 2019 for that matter, but it will certainly improve if you're to believe the coaching staff, and obviously having a new OC is going to help with that. Shifting over to the defense, the defense had its problems last year. The secondary was a mess. The linebacker core was pretty hit or miss after JJB and Jason Johnson. The thing that they excelled at was the red zone defense. They were number 1 in the country through like week 7 or 8. They still ended up finishing top 10 in the country in red zone defense. When that field got shorter, UCF was really, really efficient, really good at stopping scoring plays. But obviously a defense is more than just the red zone defense. It's going to start up front with the big guys. The defensive line, I haven't done my preview yet, but that's an A. The defensive line is a very, very strong defensive line. I mean, Tremont Morris-Brash coming back huge. Led the team with 13.5 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. He was, led all categories there. Then you have, Josh Seliskar, who's been solid really for 4 years for UCF. He's going to be he's going to be the person kind of flanking Tremont Morris-Brash. And then you have some big guys up front, obviously, with Ricky Barber. Really excited about him. He's a former freshman All-American, and I think he performed really well for UCF last year. And he's expected to do big things again for UCF. So, I mean, those kind of 3 guys anchor that D-line. You lose a guy like Anthony Montalvo, who started a bunch of games, was a 5th-year senior for UCF. But for the most part, you have a bunch of guys that are returning. Lee Hunter, the Auburn transfer, played in reserve role last year, but was really good. He just didn't have, I don't think he had the ability to play as many downs as UCF would have wanted. Like I've said, there was a point last year where Seliskar was literally playing every single snap, which is unheard of for a defensive lineman. Like every snap of every game through, I don't want to say the whole season, but the larger chunk of the end of the year. Then there's some breakout candidates also on D-line. Matthew Alexander, I've talked about him. He had the best Pro Football Focus rating last year of any UCF defensive player. He didn't get a ton of snaps. When he was in, he was efficient. He was good. So he's looking to be really good. And then Malachi Lawrence, who was Coach Heupel's part of Heupel's last class, he's apparently made some really big strides in his game, and he looks like to be a potential breakout candidate for UCF. So between him and Alexander, they have some really good guys on the line. And then Lee Hunter should be a starter for UCF. I mean, we know how talented he is. He has all of the tools. He just really needs to, put it together, and play, basically more snaps to put it, that way. UCF wasn't getting to the quarterback a ton. There was, a good amount of hurries and things like that, pressures, but they weren't, getting as many sacks as I think this line is actually capable of. So after that, we mentioned Malachi Lawrence. There's a few freshmen that I think could also make a difference. Isaiah Nixon, who's a 4-star who came in. Kaven Call, who's another, near 4-star. They're kind of making some waves in camp. They could definitely play in a backup role or maybe even start. But the exciting transfer is Sean Peterson out of FIU. He's a former running back that transitioned actually to defensive end. And I think he will be the other defensive end starter. And he looks really good. He led FIU in sacks last year. Really, really talented guy. And he was only in this will be his 2nd year at the position. So if he even breaks out a little bit, you're talking about a really good situation. And then the one freshman I didn't mention, obviously, is UCF's highest rated recruit of all time, John Walker. He's the real deal. 6'4", 310 pounds. Everyone's talking him up. I don't know if he's going to start right away because, UCF kind of has the tackle situation with Barber and Hunter at tackle and Peterson, Seliskar, and Morris-Brash at defensive end. But Walker's going to play, and he may play his way into starting role and take over someone's role or at least be rotated heavily in. I think the starters don't matter as much because there's a lot of rotations if you have depth on defensive line. So I'm really excited about John Walker, as is mostly every person in UCF Nation. Then we go to the linebackers. We have Jason Johnson returning, who obviously led the team in tackles, actually doubled Kobe Perry, who more than doubled Kobe Perry, who was 2nd place in tackles last year for UCF. He's back. He was all conference first team. He's on a bunch of award watch list. He's going to be that linebacker, leader of the linebacker core. Obviously, we lose JJP to the transfer portal to Ole Miss, so replacing him, there could be a combination. Walter Yates, played pretty well in backup duty last year. You had Cam Moore, the freshman, who played a little bit as well last year. Then you also got in a couple of transfers. Isaiah Paul came in from Washington State, and then Rion Davis from Georgia. Those guys are all in the mix. And then, of course, four-star linebacker Andrew Harris, who was part of the 23 class, one of the top-rated recruits in that class. So there are options there. It's just really no one's proven in my mind outside of Johnson and a little bit Yates, I would say. So is it going to be Harris? Is it going to be Davis? Is it going to be Paul? Maybe a combination of all of them. I would expect Davis to emerge at some point. You know, he was essentially a four-star for Georgia, you know, out of Apopka. Got some playing time at Georgia, two-time defending national champions. I think, you know, he's a redshirt senior. He's coming here to play. I think he will. And then I assume that one of the freshmen will get in, whether that's, you know, Andrew Harris or a guy like, you know, Cam Moore, like I said, you know, I think will be able to play at some point this year. But linebacker, a little bit shaky. They need to do a better job of getting to the quarterback. We need to get more sacks. You know, the Big 12 is an offensive league. So the defense is going to have to do their part and slow down some of these, you know, big-time offenses like TCU and Kansas State. We don't play TCU, but Kansas State and Oklahoma and schools like this. Then if we go to the secondary, let's be honest, was a mess last year. There wasn't a ton of reliability last year. I mean, Devad Wilson was solid. Kobe Perry, who graduated, was solid, and Wilson has obviously gone too. Devontae Brown has transferred. So really our top three defensive backs from last year are gone. But there is a lot of excitement, and that starts with DeCorian Patterson, the Middle Tennessee State transfer. You know, he had 7 picks last year, which led the country. He had more interceptions than UCF had as a team last year, which was 6, and he had 7 on the year. He's already getting first-round draft type, so if we can have that lockdown corner that can produce some turnovers, that is what the secondary is missing. I think the talent is there, but they didn't have a lockdown corner. They didn't have a ton of consistency. But, you know, at cornerback, he should be that lockdown piece for UCF this year. Then you do have a couple of returning pieces at the cornerback position. And that's, you know, you have Nakai Martinez, who's vying for a spot at nickel. You also have at safety, we would move over to, let me actually go back to the other cornerback spot would be Brandon Adams, who's returning, who's been solid for 2 years. Then this unit is going to be predicated on a lot of transfers. You have Jaire Wilson from ECU, who should get the free safety spot. You have Quadric Ballard, who's not a transfer, but he's coming back and should get the strong safety start. But then you have DeJordan Mask, who's an option there as well, and then Fred Davis, who comes over from Clemson, who could play at one of the corner spots. So there's a little bit of a crowd there, and someone's going to need to emerge. You know, my bet is Patterson is going to start at one of the cornerback positions. I think Bullard will start at one of the safety positions, and I think Wilson will also be one of the safety positions. And the other corner, whether it's Brandon Adams or maybe Nakai Martinez, Braden Marshall, the 4-star recruit, part of this 23 class, is going to get some playing time. A nice article just came out on him, and he looks like he's turning some heads. And then I think Fred Davis will also be in the mix. And then you have guys like William Wells, Jarvis Ware, who are good, you know, secondary pieces, good reserve pieces for UCF. And then even a guy like Jakari Henderson, he got some late playing time, actually played pretty well in that Duke Bowl game. They're all in the mix. So UCF has really loaded up on the secondary. Malzahn's loaded up on the secondary in the transfer portal, as well as in the recruiting classes. I mean, between Marshall, Henderson, Davis, Mask, Wilson, Patterson, Jamaric Morris, they've gotten close to, between the freshman class and transfers, close to 10 new guys in that secondary. So just who comes in and takes those spots? I think we have our lockdown in Patterson, and who fills out around him is the question. But the secondary definitely needs to improve. It obviously had its issues last year, gave up a ton of yards, did not produce turnovers. That's something that UCF is going to need to get better at this season, is getting turnovers, because UCF was actually towards the bottom of the country in producing turnovers last year. So can they actually produce some turnovers, you know, create some negative plays, and get this defense where it needs to be? Excuse me. Then if we hop over to special teams, feels like for the first time in a while, UCF is really set on special teams. You obviously have kicker Colton Boomer, one of the best names in the country. He comes back after missing just one field goal last year. Real excited about him again. He's a reliable, nail-down, knockdown kicker that we can rely on and be depend on to, you know, hit those field goals, hit those extra points. Then at punter, you have Mitch McCarthy coming back, who also took over in the middle of the year for Andrew Osteen. He was statistically one of UCF's better punters in recent memory. He's reliable. He's got a big leg. He'll be able to, you know, get some great punts out there, put UCF in good field positions. Then long snapper, long-time Alex Ward, left for the NFL, is on the Rams now, is being replaced by Gage King, who, by all accounts, seems to be reliable. So the special teams looks to be in really good shape. You know, punt return, kick return, I would say probably a combination of Xavier Townsend and Johnny Richardson again, maybe Amari Johnson now that he's healthy. Obviously, those three guys are speedsters, guys that you want, you know, returning kicks, returning punts. So I think the special teams is in a really good spot. I don't really have too many issues there. I'd actually rate it an A now that, you know, the Colton Boomer is locked and loaded. He is coming off a leg injury, but shouldn't impact his start of the season. So I think UCF's looking really good from special teams. So that's kind of a high-level roster overview. You know, when you look at this year also, I think a big thing is transfers. UCF had 18 transfers, and I'm predicting probably at least 7, maybe 8 to start when you combine the offense and the defense. It could be more based on injuries, and then I think another 3, 4, 5 are going to be, you know, heavily rotated in players. So UCF did a good job going to the portal. I love going to the portal for skill players like wide receiver, you know, tight end, even defensive back I think is fine. I don't like doing it for the offensive line. Offensive line is a big area where you need gel, you need chemistry. And UCF has really dipped into that transfer well 2 straight years and just filling it with seniors. And then they graduate and you kind of have to start the process over again. So I don't love that, but I do like what they did at linebacker, in the secondary, obviously at wide receiver, and then at quarterback to provide depth. Those were kind of the main 4 or 5 positions they filled through the portal. So you have that. Then the 2023 recruiting class, I really like some of these freshmen to come in and actually play right away. Obviously, John Walker being one of them, Caven Call being one of them. Then you also maybe have like a freshman wide receiver that could come in and play, offensive line, maybe Keon Cox. So there's definitely some options that on the freshman class that are going to come in and play right away, and Randy Pittman, of course, at tight end. A lot of talented guys from this 2023 class, which was rated number 50 in the country. Had a few 4-stars that I think can all make an immediate impact, more than we've seen freshmen make an impact in recent memory. Because even if you go back to last year, really the only freshman that played was like Xavier Townsend, Cam Moore a little bit on defense, Jakari Henderson. So there wasn't a ton of freshmen that made a huge impact. But this year, I think that changes. I think there will be 4, maybe 5 guys that can come in and play immediately. Then when you look at UCF's schedule, UCF's got a tough schedule, and there's no doubt about it right off the bat. I mean, we start off obviously with Kent State. That should be at home. That should be an easy win. But week 2, heading right up to Boise, Idaho to play the Broncos. They're going to want revenge from our 2021 thrilling win over them. Playing on that blue turf, that is not going to be easy. That's going to set a test right away. Right away is going to set a test and, kind of see where UCF's season is. That could set a tone for, the early season at least, because you lose that, you're 1-1, and then you have the conference schedule looming there with some really tough games to start that conference schedule. So hopefully they can, get past Boise State. Then you play FCS Villanova. You're starting off 3-0. You feel really good. You have a little bit of a cushion going into the conference play. But hello and welcome to the Big 12. UCF starts off on the road against the defending Big 12 champion, number 16, now that the AP poll just came out earlier this week. Number 16, Kansas State on the road in UCF's first ever Power 5 conference game. hello and welcome to the Big 12. That's not going to be an easy game. You might circle it for a loss because that is going to be a very, very difficult game. But let's just say they lose that. Then we come back and you get Baylor at home, a winnable game. You could theoretically start out 4-1. Then you go on the road to play Kansas, who's a much improved Kansas. They made a bowl game last year. They're liking their new coach under Lance Leopold. They have some good pieces there. It's no longer, a walk in the park. No game really for UCF in the Big 12 is a walk in the park anymore. It's not, we don't have any more, I don't want to say Tulane, but that's because they just have been good recently. But the Temples and the Tulsas, even though we performed bad against some USFs, there's not really a week off in the Big 12. It's just a fact. And in that game against Kansas proceeds going on the road to take on number 20 Oklahoma and our former quarterback, good old Dylan Gabriel. So you have a stretch here where you have two top 20 teams in a 4-week span, both on the road. So that Baylor and that Kansas game at home is going to become absolutely critical to win if we want to, stay in the conference race. I'm not saying we're expected to, be in the conference race, but that's going to be a huge factor is how do we perform in those home games, those first two Big 12 home games, because, we may unfortunately take an L against Kansas State and Oklahoma. After that, then UCF is going to face West Virginia at home for homecoming. That should be really, really exciting. There's a little bit of history there. We played them before, and that's going to be a cool home game. They're likely looking to be one of the worst teams in the conference, West Virginia, so that should be a winnable game against the Mountaineers. And then we go on the road to face our former conference and current conference foes. Probably our biggest rival that still exists is Cincinnati. Cincinnati's going to take a step back. They obviously lost Luke Fickell, their head coach, to Wisconsin, and that's going to be a challenging game on the road, but a game that we can win. Then we finish out a 3-week stretch with basically 2 home games, Oklahoma State and Houston, and then we have Texas Tech as our final road game, which is they're going to be improved. They were an 8-win team last year, one of the few teams in the Big 12 that had a winning record in the conference. That's not going to be an easy one. So, taking Houston, taking Cincy, taking West Virginia is a must, because Oklahoma State, as much as at home, that's not like an automatic win either. They're going to be good. They're not as good as they were a few years ago, when they were at the top of the conference, but they're going to be a good team. So UCF really doesn't have too many gaps. You look at maybe Kansas on the road, you look at West Virginia at home, and then Cincy and Houston as the easier games. But they're going to have to win some of those games because Texas Tech, Oklahoma, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, those are not going to be easy games. And UCF actually has no back-to-back home games in conference all season. They only go on the road 2 times in a row, but they don't have any back-to-back home games. So it's kind of be yin and yanging from home and away. So there's no, consistent home comfort, if you will. But look, I'm excited for this season. There's probably more to break down, but that, we still need to get the depth chart, which hasn't come out yet. We know for the most part who's starting at a lot of the key positions, but you still got to figure out all the offensive line starters. You got to figure that wide receiver 3 spot, and you definitely need to figure out the entire secondary, as well as some of the linebacker pieces. I mean, I think we have some, some indicators of who's going to be there, but no official ones. The big one I'm looking at is offensive line, though. As of right now, I only see Paole as the guaranteed starter. And then outside of that, I'm not sure 100% who are going to be the other 4 starters. So, figuring out some of those pieces, but once again, I think this comes down to kind of 3 or 4 key things. JRP's improvement, the offensive line gelling, the linebackers stepping up, the secondary stepping up, and then getting to the quarterback and producing turnovers. We did not get to the quarterback and we did not produce turnovers last year. We didn't put ourselves in positions to flip the script, and we really need to do that this year, especially going up against top-tier offenses that could light you up. You got to get some negative plays and you got to get some turnovers to put UCF's offense in a good position. And then the offense needs to, take their next step. And that obviously is predicated on JRP, making major jumps in his game. but we cannot be one-dimensional. As much as it was great to see how good UCF's running game was and we ran down people's throats, the air game has got to be involved. We saw when UCF was at its best was when those two things were firing on both cylinders, like in 2017 and 2018. You got to have that dual threat thing going on. So we'll see. There's some other exciting things is, new OC, new DC. Addison Williams takes over as defensive coordinator. He's adding new ripples to the defense. His whole thing is being predicated on being more aggressive. He's putting an emphasis, he said this in camp, on getting turnovers and getting to the quarterback. And then Darren Hinshaw, on the flip side, said exactly what we wanted to hear. He's going to involve the passing game and be more of a vertical threat. So they're saying all the right things, but will it happen, when the game starts and you're in the thick of it? That's what those are the big improvements that UCF, I think, needs to see. If you're really to break it down on a simple level, that's it right there on the defensive side, being more aggressive, and on offense, including the passing game, so it's a reliable threat. So I'm excited. We should all be really excited for this season. It's a big litmus test. The final year of Oklahoma and Texas, we get to play Oklahoma. A lot of people are considering us a dark horse candidate to maybe make some noise in the conference. I think we can do it. We just gotta win the winnable games, and you get a couple upsets, and I think it's possible. So we'll see if it comes together. We have a lot of exciting transfers, a lot of exciting freshmen, a lot of momentum in recruiting in general right now. So it's time to put it into play, and I'm excited. Go Knights, charge on.